So the problem becomes when you're running a fintech, how do you know whether your user is a good guy or a bad guy? And how do you know whether your good guys are not being taken advantage of by bad guys? So it's a data problem. Your rules can be amazing. Your rules can be super strong. You can be strict. They can be loose. But if you don't have data, your rules don't get the job done the way you need them to. And that's why fraud
When
exists.
you need the data too, and it's not just rules. That's like the most basic, but it's also predictive models, right? So you take all the data and you train logistical regression, predictive kind of models. Like, what's the probability this is fraud? What probability, how many false positives can I live with? How many false negatives can I live with? What's the F1 score on this? And there's a machine learning component as well. But it sounds like the problem that Archer is solving is like, hey, can we get all the fintech institutions in the world to share data on the fraudulent activity so we can all improve our models and our rules? Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to sit down with Zach Bijesse. He's the CEO, co-founder of Archer, and previously the co-founder of PayHippo. His journey spans multiple ventures in addition to those, and now he's working on Archer, which is a cross-company fraud detection, which fights against the billions lost annually to fraud. Zach, years in the making. Thanks for coming on the Ignite podcast.
Thank you.
You started, teaching math way back in the day. How did you get into entrepreneurship? Like, what kind of sparked that kind of first decade of your career?
I think teaching math, it sticks out on the LinkedIn. It sticks out on the CV. Not that I have a CV anymore, but it shouldn't be thought of as like its own thing. It's like, it was just a part of the journey of, hey, we see problems, we see things we want to solve for, and we go do it. Before I was a math teacher, I was trying to build a company called SlimmerMe. And that was my first tech company. I didn't know what venture capital was for sure, but I didn't know anything about tech startups. I just said, hey, let's build a mobile app that actually helps people lose weight. Because I was a personal trainer and I saw all the apps sucked. So like, let's just build a better one. Very much just like, hey, here's a problem, let's solve it. So it turns out it's really difficult to help people lose weight. So that one did not go very far.
Yeah, I'm literally on Ozempic right now. Like, I gained a bunch of weight during COVID. And I'm in my mid 40s now, and it just was not coming off. I play basketball 3 times a week. I work out every day. I eat well. And like, the weight was not coming off. And I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. And so I've lost like 20 pounds now. I'm still losing weight. Yeah. I mean, it took like a couple months, but, and I want to get down another 30, get back to my college weight. But yeah, it is hard to lose weight.
That was my first tech company, and trying to help people lose weight with a mobile app. We didn't go far, but it brought me into the world of running tech companies. And because I only wanted to solve problems, it wasn't like I did that company and hey, now I'm going to go do another one. I only just wanted to solve important problems because I didn't know the next big project. I said, hey, what's the most important thing in the world? Education. Let's go get into the weeds of like, how do we have more innovative models, not just of like teaching, but also how schools are structured. How do we structure schools to be as efficient as businesses, but still have the outcomes for education to help kids be well-rounded, good, smart people? So I started teaching just to learn, like, hey, how do we do education differently on a societal level?
I washed out of Wall Street. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on the podcast, but I worked really hard, grew up poor, got my CFA, worked on Wall Street, and I hated it. And when I washed out, I enrolled in the Teaching Fellows program in New York City. And I was teaching up in the Bronx. I was teaching honor students math. So it was pretty easy to teach honor kids, even in the Bronx, and after a semester, I was like, I don't like this, washed out,
But were you thinking, oh, I want to do math, or you're thinking I wanted to work with kids?
Yeah, I think it was like an overreaction of washing out of Wall Street and not liking that lifestyle. So I was like, well, how can I have an impact and do good and, and give back? And, I had a lot of teachers that impacted me and showed me a different path to college and stuff like that. And without them, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at. So I was like, okay, I'll try to go do that as well and give back. And it turns out I'm just a terrible teacher and I'm super impatient. And
Brian, I think you could teach. I just think it would take a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Bless their hearts. All these teachers that do this for, 30, 40 bucks an hour or whatever it is now,
Yeah. I thought it wasn't about me making an impact because I just thought, hey, look, if I go teach kids, okay, great. But how do we make schools across the entire world better? What are models of how to do that better? And so I joined Success Academy, which is a super polarizing name to say education, because their approach is just, I don't know what else to say other than polarizing, because there are people who are huge advocates of what they do because the results are incredible in terms of test results. And then there are people who are just, hater is not a strong enough word. So I said, wow, this is insane. What an interesting way of running a school. They do everything outcome based. So every lesson.
Would you invest in a company that had bad Glassdoor reviews?
Yeah, for sure. And I'd have to talk to the CEO to understand, hey, have they learned their lesson or are they just chronically an asshole? Put in the context though, they said, hey, why don't we run a school network like a business would run? Not meaning that you're trying to make money off the kids, although people do private education. It was saying, hey, if our product is kids, how do we measure that? All right. So test results typically do that. A lot of times test results are not a good indicator of whether you've learned. It's just, you're good at tests.
Yeah, so you regurgitated some knowledge in a structured way. That's what I always hated about tests is like, oh, I memorized the pattern. My whole GMAT experience for my MBA is like, taking, like learning all the like little patterns, all the tricks to get a higher math score. That's basically all it was.
But I bet you're really good at those decimal tricks, right? Of like, yeah, how do I multiply
PTSD, man? PTSD.
Yeah,
I was like working. I was working at a startup and like studying my GMAT every evening for like 4 or 5 hours. I'd study all night, 5:30 to 9:30, 10:30. And I did that for months to get a high GMAT score so I could get into a good school.
Did you?
Yeah, I went to Berkeley. It's a pretty good school, I think.
That's a great school. Wow.
Yeah. But I had to take the GMAT 3 times. So first test 650, second test 660, and I'm like, I really got to get that 700. Really got to get that 700. So it took me 3 tests.
Nice.
Yeah. 710. Yeah.
That was me with the SAT. Yeah. I took the SAT 4 times.
I took it. So I grew up poor and I didn't know any better. And I was actually like suspended from school for half of 10th grade. I'm like giving away a lot on this podcast. I was just like in a lot of trouble in high school. And so when I started junior year, I was way behind. I was taking 0 period and 7th period to catch up. So I was taking 2 extra periods a day. I had freshman credits, meaning I didn't even have a semester's worth of credits. And so by the time I took the SAT, like I was only taking like geometry. Like I was way behind. I was taking like 9th grade math basically in my senior year, trying to catch up and graduate.
Sure. Yeah.
And so my SAT was super low, but then Western Washington University gave me a scholarship because I wrote this like nice essay about my background and woe is me. And the lady up there, I think her name was Kathy, gave me a scholarship. I eventually graduated from UW, but
still, shout out to Western.
Yeah, shout out to Western. Seeing like a little diamond in the rough, little needle in the haystack, and giving me a shot and a scholarship, and that's pretty cool. Hopefully someday I'll make enough money and be able to, start the Team Ignite Foundation or the Bell Foundation and give students like me a shot. And I think that's a goal and a dream of mine someday. So you're teaching at one of the worst academies in the world.
But it was a successful academy, Success Academy.
Oh, yeah.
No, honestly, it was a great experience because despite the bad reviews you'll see, I'm saying now, we should give them credit because there were this organization saying, hey, let's be outcome oriented. Businesses get so efficient optimizing for their KPIs. Why can't we optimize for KPIs? And no, not just test scores, but can we do it for tests that actually assess whether someone has learned something? So there's a whole craft of making tests that Success Academy got really good at. I, turns out, sucked at teaching, probably start off and then just buckled down and studied up like how do you teach kids? And then after reading a whole book on it and making flashcards of different teaching techniques to learn how the hell do you teach kids concepts, like, and how do you do things in the classroom? My kids ended up being some of the highest performing in the school network. I was teaching science at the time before math. And then they gave me a teaching award, which was nuts because keep in mind, it was like my 2nd year ever working with kids. Yeah. But, it kind of became obvious, like I wasn't going to teach forever. And my heart was yearning for the tech space. And I would spend my summers of teaching, the summer breaks when all my, like the other teachers were on the beach chilling, taking their break, much needed, much deserved. I was doing like adult internships with startups to go work with them and like learn, hey, how the hell do you build a company? Because I tried it with the whole weight loss thing and it failed. How are these guys building like legit venture-backed companies? It totally ignited me. And so basically, I got super into this thing of like, hey, I'm going to build a tech company again eventually, but I don't want to do it until there's a clear problem that I actually am convinced to solve. One of the companies I was working with was a Nigerian tech company in Nigeria, and that was just a mind-blowing experience. Imagine you're a guy who's never left the US, who's a teacher for kids in the Bronx. I was teaching in Harlem, but they're from Bronx, Harlem. And all of a sudden now you're working with a tech company in Nigeria and you're like,
different culture. Yeah.
And I was like, where the hell's Nigeria?
A lot of people probably couldn't even point out directionally correct anything on the like a unmarked African map where Nigeria is.
Yeah. They were like, West Africa. I was like, West Africa? There's a West. Makes sense, of course.
Yeah, it's a continent. Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be a West. I just didn't know we would call it
the California of Africa. I guess South Africa is Cape Town and stuff. Feels very Big Sur-ish.
Cape Town is definitely California.
Yeah.
100%. Anyway, so that's how I went from, for your question, go from teaching to ending up running a tech company in Nigeria. We skipped some steps, but yeah.
Yeah. So what was that founding? How'd you find your co-founder? What was the aha moment to spark the idea, spark the action towards the idea?
Well, people don't know that before PayHippo, I was working on another venture. It was a nonprofit to help people pitch for startup investment. This is the first thing I did when I got to Nigeria, before anything FinTech related. I said, there's so many small business owners and startups in Africa with no access to money. I remember when I was doing SlimmerMe, that startup, we did a pitch competition. And it was such a helpful experience for us. Let's bring that to startups where that doesn't necessarily exist. And so I was trying to launch an NGO called Pitched in Nigeria. So I went and lived in Nigeria in the suburbs. I lived with a Nigerian family that hosted me, spent all of my minuscule savings from teaching to launch this NGO. And honestly, after a few months, I said, yeah, this idea doesn't make any sense. Because most of the small business owners in Nigeria they're not startups, they're just SMEs. And pitch competitions obviously don't make sense for them. What makes sense is they need like credit, loans,
like Kiva finance. Kind of microloan kind of stuff.
So it was like Kiva was super micro. These businesses were more like serious operations where they have stores or they have multiple employees. And there was just no access to credit. There's a problem in the US for small businesses. So imagine how it is in Nigeria. There's no credit. So I said, hey, cool, I want to work on that problem. But again, I wasn't in the spirit of, hey, I'm going to go start a company for the sake of doing it. It was like, hey, there's probably other companies solving this problem. I'm going to go work for one. One was Lydia Finance. Went to go work for Lydia, and just after 8 months saw so many ways that like you could do it better. There was just a huge gap of technology at the time for them and then the other people trying to compete with them. It's like, hey, no one's actually doing tech-enabled small business lending. Let's do that because there's no way of scaling this product and maintaining quality of your product without some level of automation. It sounds like common sense to say. And it's not like this was 2 decades ago. This was like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we started PayHippo. Who did I start it with? I started with these great co-founders, Chioma and Uche, who I had done a little bit of nonprofit work with while I was living in Nigeria, and got to know them through that, and just saw like, hey, there's so much I don't know about Nigeria. I can't just be a solo founder from outside the country, even if I've lived here for a couple of years. I can't come in here and just run a company and just do it alone. You can't even do that with a regular tech company in the US. Solo founding is
you kind of shouldn't.
a nightmare.
Right? You should definitely have a co-founder or two. NYC probably wouldn't even accepted you guys as a solo founder. Yeah.
Absolutely not. No.
What was that? What was that discussion or decision like? You're like, hey, we might have something here. Let's just throw a hat in the ring and at YC.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I was less thinking we have something because it was just like given to me. It's like, of course we're going to apply to YC. Let's apply, and then we got rejected. Okay.
The first time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we got
A lot of people don't know
rejected.
this, but a lot of folks have to apply 2, 3, 4 times to get in.
Yeah. So we got in on the third time. We applied a
Wow.
second time. Got rejected. And because they didn't really like lending businesses.
That's
Lending's
tough.
ridiculous. It's so
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah. All of my customers, well, most of my customers at Archer are lenders. And like, just like, hey, you're doing the hard work here. I support you.
What makes it tough? Like, I have one of my portfolio companies struggling to get a debt facility. So you got to get the debt facility. Then you have to have equity to get your debt facility. And then you got to figure out how you make money. And then you got to package the loans and sell them off. Then you have this like consumer asset class of, is it secured or not? And there's just so many complexities of lending. Although I've had some successful investments, Fin in Southeast Asia, they do earned wage access,
Cool.
just killing it, growing super fast, and a lending business. But yeah, but I've also
great.
had a bunch of lending shutdowns, consumer lending shutdowns. So,
Well, people are typically doing alternative lending because it's an alternative, meaning it doesn't already exist. So you have this new model of doing lending. Then you go
people
and
don't
try to get
understand.
funding.
Yeah.
The consumer doesn't necessarily understand, so you have to educate them on the consumer. Okay, lending is so difficult, not just because you have to go find money, convince people to give it to you with a model that they've never seen before, by definition.
Right.
You go lend it, and then you got to go get it back. Okay, you give money and then you get it back. So people think the most difficult part is getting it back. Absolutely, it's difficult. For sure. I used to run loan recovery for a bit of time at PayHippo, and that was my day in, day out. Yeah. But people don't realize how difficult it is to give loans to people because the people who want your loans the most, oftentimes are not the people who you want to give loans to.
It's paradoxical because the ones that actually have the need are not very underwritable.
Yeah. And then the ones
if I had money, I wouldn't need money. But since I have money, you'll give me money. It's kind of like this catch-22 thing with banks.
Totally catch-22. And there's so many exceptions to this, but
yeah.
With alternative lending, you're typically not giving a huge amount of money. So to go convince some legitimate business owner whose business is larger than your business, by the way, you're a lender and they got more revenue than you do, you're going to convince them to take a loan from you. And it's peanuts compared to what they're used to. And you're making them fill out KYC. I mean, that's a necessity, but then they have to like follow through a whole application, agree to your terms, agree to interest that's typically higher than even if they can't get bank financing, they still have the number in their head, like what a bank gives in a loan. And so then they're comparing you to that number. So you have a battle to convince someone to take a loan who may not even need it and who's going to fight you on price comparisons for interest rates that are half of yours because it's compared to banks. Of course, they can't get that money. That's why your product exists. That's a really tough sales process. So people think that lending's about, hey, how do you get the money back? Totally. Yes. But I can tell you, I've done so many cold calls for people to accept loans, and that shit is not easy to sell. It's not like free money. It's like all the people who are legit are like,
I got a deal for you. I could give you a loan at 10% interest. And and you're comparing it to a bank that's, 4 or 5%. Like, yes. Why would I do that?
Why would I do that?
Because of
you're just skeptical
financial leverage in your P&L, financial leverage.
For sure. Like you need money to go buy a bunch of products and you don't have it. So all the people trying to buy from you, it's just classic turnover for inventory. That was our bread and butter. But, people would also try to work with us to do expansion of locations, etc. And this was all possible with financing. So we did a lot of good with our financing for sure. The point being that you do a lot of good by building trust with these borrowers. Because again, the most creditworthy ones, they see loan, they see lender, and they have no interest in talking to you.
So when you guys applied to YC, was it with this consumer kind of lending, SME kind of lending platform? And did you guys pivot in the program? Did you pivot after? Like, what was that journey like?
Oh yeah, we pivoted like a year and a half after YC, if I can
Wow.
estimate. Yeah, because YC let us in, I think, because we got savvier at finding lending capital, and they recognized that we were starting to build really strong relationships for sources of capital, but also because our revenue just kept increasing and our numbers were just strong. So when we
Back then,
first
YC was
applied,
more indexed on letting in startups that actually had traction. I noticed, 3 or 4 years ago when I started investing in YC, well, 5 years ago, some of the companies had 500K, 750K of ARR coming out of the program. And now it's the opposite. They pivoted 3 weeks ago, and Gary Tan's kind of making a push towards more of almost like an incubator, like just taking in teams that want to work on something together that are really talented, and they may pivot like twice. And so you get these teams that are like, yeah, we just landed our first POC and we have $2,000 of MRR. It's it's just so early.
And for me, I have mixed feelings on that because a reason why because I know you optimize for second time founders, and like I would totally
Who,
upvote
me?
that. Yeah.
No, not really. I'd say it's
Was I just
50-50.
special?
Yeah, you're just special.
Shit.
We do a lot of first time founders out of accelerators through our network, through referrals. I mean, the second and third time founders are amazing, but usually they have their pick of VC because they've been there, done that before. Or
True.
So they can just call up their old VC pals and be like, hey, I'm doing another startup. Here's 5 million, And you see this a lot with successful unicorn founders. They raise a lot of money very, very fast. So they'll get a $5 or $10 million seed right out of the gate. So it's like my little Team Ignite check is crushed out of the round immediately.
Yeah. I mean,
so if anything, I kind of
that's
index towards first time founders.
right. I think that makes sense too, because you look at, I mean, we haven't announced any raising of any money, but like look at who gave us money at Archer, right? It was just people who knew us, who invested in the first company.
You and I, VCs and angels who backed you, and so you already had that kind of network in place. You didn't have to go out and cold.
Like they asked us to it. They found out I was doing a new thing, and they asked to invest. Whereas which was super easy, right? Like we didn't have to really do anything to get money. So cool. Except for I spent years in the trenches the first time around, and I remember conversations with some of these people and how long this shit took. So I'm like, yeah, it's fast now, but man, I still got the scars from
you
the
lay
first
the
time.
groundwork. Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing for a venture fund. Like the first fund's the hardest. Second fund, a little easier. Third fund, much easier. So as long as you're making good investments and they're marked up, it just becomes like I just call up the LPs, Yeah, hey, that fund one that's super marked up, we're doing a fund two, and it just becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. What a good call, Nick. Hey, guys. We'll throw some money in on this.
Yeah. That money I made into more money? Do you want to give me more money to make into more money? Yeah? Okay, cool.
Yeah, what a good call to receive. YC got in third time. Definitely recommend it to anyone considering applying. It's so worth it.
It's still considered the best accelerator in the world. What do you think kind of sets it apart? It was kind of first to market, you could argue, 20 years ago with Paul Graham.
Honestly, I think it's a first to market thing. Yeah. I think that's what they would say because it's so tangible to say that. But my opinion's a little bit more like the kind that would piss off other accelerators, which is I genuinely think that the DNA of YC is better. Like Paul Graham's essays, they're not just essays.
Founder mode.
That's how he thought. Yeah, I mean, even now he's releasing cool shit. Like, what a good article. But those old essays from 2009, that's how the man thought. And so he was thinking in a way that was really disciplined about how to run a company, how to build a great company. This is the guy whose DNA is built into Y Combinator, right? Now, there are other cool people with great opinions online. I would say it's the difference between an Elon Musk and a Paul Graham. Elon Musk can say things and get money and get people convinced to do things. Okay. Paul Graham is going to say things that help other founders run their companies. Totally different.
Yeah, he's not interested in the money. He's just
It's like
interested in giving
LeBron
back to
James
founders. Yeah.
versus the coach. Who's LeBron James' coach? Paul Graham is Tyloo.
Right. Or Steve Kerr.
Yeah. Steve Kerr. Also, I feel really guilty toward LeBron James for equating him with Elon Musk.
Right. And Elon's the Jordan of entrepreneurship.
I would say he's the Jordan of, must be. Yeah, I hate to say that. I think of it as like a fundraising and deal making. I mean, that is most of his company. So I'm definitely I'm definitely doing everything I can to avoid giving him like full credit.
Have you read his biography by Isaacson?
No.
Really good. I listened to it, while I was out walking the neighborhood and stuff, and it's just really well done. And I read Isaacson's Jobs biography, 15 years ago, whatever it was, and I think he does equally as good of a job just painting the caricature of Elon, really examining the person that he is. And yeah, it's not an accident he has like 5 or 6 really successful companies. The guy just works relentlessly, dives super deep, thinks from first principles, and it's just a unique guy, right?
Person, I guess. He missed Spider-Man 1, like Uncle Ben laying on the street, like, great power.
I remember the phrase. I don't remember the situation.
Yeah. I'm like, cool, you got Spidey powers. That's amazing. I'm not going to try and take those Spidey powers away from you. Fantastic. You got to use them for good, sir.
Well, as we record this too, I mean, Trump just got reelected a couple days ago. And so Elon I'm interested to see what they do with the government, because Elon's going to come in there and Twitterize it. He's the czar to go cut government spending. That's what they want to do. So that'll be really interesting to see how Elon can make the government more efficient if he kind of takes a fresh look at first principles of everything.
Let's see.
It's going to be fireworks. Let's see if they can actually do anything.
He like I said, I give him points on fundraising and deal making. Okay. Let's see. Are those translatable to the public sector? Or is it more about, like completely different set of priorities than this? I think fundraising would be more applicable if you were trying to revamp the economy of an emerging market that's doing its best to get funding from World Bank. It's doing its best, like Nigeria, for example, is on a global gray list, so they can't get all of the access that a developed country would get or an unlisted country would get. That could use some of that Elon energy of deal making, pitching, etc. I don't know if the US needs to pitch itself more. I don't know if that's the thing it needs right now. Probably more like, hey, climate change is really bad. Let's do something about that. And by the way, electric cars are great. It's like, hey, sure, but let's also like not deny climate change. Let's start there.
Oh, yeah, the orange one? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think economically, we're already on the path towards clean energy. And I worked in solar 15 years ago. I did clean energy legislation for the state of Hawaii, a Sierra Club. It was a volunteer position, but I was lobbying for clean energy as director of energy policy. When I came to SF, I didn't even want to work in tech. I wanted to work in solar. I was like trying to save the world. But as I kind of studied solar, I realized it had been doubling at a very predictable rate over 40 years, 30, 35 years at that point. And every time it doubled, it took about 20 to 24 months, it would decrease in price by about 15 to 20%. And it's been happening for like 4 decades. And so at the time, I think the installed cost per watt was $5 or $6. This is 15 years ago, 2011, 13 years ago. And now it's like $2 or $1 if you do like megawatt scale. And so it's the cheapest form of energy now. Maybe nuclear can or geothermal can kind of give a run for the money there, but so economically it's already there. And then on the EV side of things, it's half the cost per mile or 75% less per mile driven. So the total cost of ownership to drive an EV. So economically, it's all just there.
I wouldn't say it's all there because the world's on fire. Temperature is not doing well. We're off target.
Yeah.
We have some good shit that's happened. If anything, we should use that as positive momentum to say, hey, look, the price of solar panels has drastically improved and will continue to do so. How magical is that? Now we need to do that with other facets of society, right? Like,
I look at everything in a lens of techno-optimism, singularity is near kind of thinking. And so I believe in human beings to be just innovative and solve problems. And you combine that with all the exponentially expanding technologies that we have at our disposal, AI, and others.
Have you
I
read
think the
any
future is very bright.
Asimov? Any Isaac Asimov? I've read it over the past few years. Yeah, like this. The story of Asimov is like, hey, you have all this technology, and everything gets so advanced. Some of the problems like get worse. Some of them stay the same. Like foundation, there's extreme inequality on the capital planet. Like there's people living in like slums, and then like the emperor controls, I think, 25,000 planets. Right. So it's like
I think if you think economically though about the future, and you kind of take a techno-economics kind of lens on it, the cost of our inputs, labor and materials, will asymptote to zero because of robotics and AI. And so we will all be living in a super abundant, like post-scarcity, post-capitalist society because of that. It would be like giving you a car would be like giving you my Wi-Fi password. Take my car. I don't give a shit.
Again, not good. Yeah.
We should talk about Archer.
We're building a solution to a huge problem I faced running a neobank. When we ran PayHippo, and PayHippo is doing really well now, but it's not a neobank anymore. We pivoted away from that model because of the huge opportunity in solar financing. So
there you go.
But it all comes full circle. It's a PayHippo is a fast growing solar financing, renewable energy financing platform in Africa. We did financing for small businesses. We realized we were good at financing, but we saw a huge opportunity in the world of, hey, energy is really expensive here and panels are cheaper than ever. Shout outs to Brian.
Right.
Yeah. And
hey, I didn't do that. I just noticed it.
So
I love doing the podcast.
That's what we're here for.
Bunch of random shit. Yeah, that's great.
Bunch of random shit. We moved away from SME lending to follow an opportunity, but when I was CEO, before I handed the reins over and promoted my CFO to run the company, and again, he's doing a great job. When I was CEO, we were a neobank, and I was in the trenches with a bunch of other neobanks, a bunch of other fintechs. And we all have the same problem. Fraudsters and bad guys go to where the money is, and that's fintech. So they're constantly trying to steal from you as a company or steal from your users. Okay. So what do? Well, the fundamentals are in place already because it's 2024. We have fundamentals like, KYC your customers. Another one is, hey, set up some rules. So if suspicious shit happens, you block it or catch it.
We've seen this before, so if we see that again, we're gonna flag it for human review.
Totally. Yeah, and a really easy example is with devices. If you have someone who signs up for 10 accounts on one device, that's
probably a red flag.
Suspicious. Yeah, totally. So what do? You set up rules to flag how many accounts are allowed on one device. Typically one is the maximum, but
yeah, maybe two. You got to do a multi-factor authentication, and then on the third, it's like, hey, you got to call us.
Yeah, it's like you'd have to look at the type of device, the type of service. There's exceptions, but typically it's 1-to-1. So look, there's basics.
In the middle of the Atlantic at latitude and longitude 0.
Yeah. What a place to apply for credit. So look, I was running a neobank with the same problems everyone else was facing, which is that people would try to exploit the systems, take advantage of users, and you have the fundamentals of KYC and basic kind of fraud rules,
MFA, and
all the good stuff. But it still isn't enough. That's why hundreds of billions of dollars get lost from fraud every year, even though almost.
Is that how big the problem is? So we have a GDP of something like 100 trillion worldwide. And it's close to probably 1%, 1 or 2%, right? Or 0.5%, you're saying?
So sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower than a given sort of economic activity. So 5% of the transfers out of Canada are reported as fraudulent, just as an example. Just one
out of 20.
Yeah, and that's the reported ones. Yeah, that's outbound out of Canada, because typically cross-border is higher risk because you don't have optics onto the other side of the transaction. You typically just can see, your own country.
Yeah, there's some intermediary bank that you wire to, and then they kind of figure it out on the other side. And
Exactly. So the problem becomes when you're running a fintech How do you know whether your user is a good guy or a bad guy? And how do you know whether your good guys are not being taken advantage of by bad guys? So it's a data problem. Your rules can be amazing. Your rules can be super strong. You can be strict. They can be loose. But if you don't have data, your rules don't get the job done the way you need them to. And that's why fraud
When
exists.
you need the data too, and it's not just rules. That's like the most basic, but it's also predictive models, right? So you take all the data and you train logistical regression, predictive kind of models. Like, what's the probability this is fraud? What probability, like how many false positives can I live with? How many false negatives can I live with? What's the F1 score on this? And there's a machine learning component as well. But it sounds like the problem that Archer is solving is like, hey, how can we get all the fintech institutions in the world to share data on the fraudulent activity so we can all improve our models and our rules?
Right. That's Archer.
It's amazing. Why hasn't anyone done this before? It seems like an obvious idea. When I heard it, I was like, that doesn't exist?
No, people have tried to do it. Some people have been successful. Others have stumbled. The biggest problem here is breadth. When you have a network, you need breadth of the network to cover as much surface area as possible across, in our case, users who are signed up at fintech platforms, for example. Companies that try to do what we do are already doing other things. So their main focus is typically on, supplying a fraud management tool or doing some sort of KYC, like those fundamentals we discussed, or some of the other cool types of fraud tools. So you'll see many companies have launched some sort of fraud consortium. They launch it as add-ons. No company has come, at least in the regions we operate in, no company has come and said, hey, we are the overarching fraud layer. We are the overarching fraud data network. So no matter what your KYC is, no matter what kind of fraud tools you're using, great. You can still use Archer because we're making all of those systems that you have even stronger.
So what's your hope when you look out, 5 or 10 years? What does Archer look like?
Should we do 10? So when I think 20 years ahead, I think about how we're going to be plugged into not just every bank and financial institution in emerging markets, but also in developed countries as well. So we can block all the fraud that you can't catch at a given fintech or bank that's within any country. And then you can do even more powerful things like that 5% statistic on Canada I mentioned earlier, where 5% of transactions leaving Canada are fraudulent.
Crazy.
That's just one country, right?
Right.
In our future, 20 years from now, that's zero.
Because you have such a robust data set that's constantly updated by all these institutions, sharing it, paying the SaaS fee to Archer to have this kind of shared database.
We'll definitely be charging all of them for the value.
Yeah, we call that a platform tax in the industry. You become like the Amazon.com of this, right? And you take a tax on all the e-commerce revenue. And for you guys, it's like, okay, all the transactions in the world and all the fraudulent ones sit in this database, and you're going to share it. What's in it for them? Why share? Like you talk to like a Chase or somebody like that, somebody that has such big bank reach and has their own remittances and credit cards worldwide. Like, oh, we got all that. We got all the data.
Well, the fact is they're already trying to communicate with other financial institutions. They already do this or try to, but there's no secure platform for them to do compliantly, and there's no way to automate it. So you'll see risk departments calling them each other up and trying to work through cases.
Yeah, here's what we saw today. Have you seen this kind of thing? Yeah.
I swear to God, there are Slack groups. I can't say names, but there are Slack groups set up between fintechs, billion-dollar companies.
Yeah.
There's Slack groups set up for the risk teams to do investigations and ask each other questions.
Wow.
By the way, that's not really legal, but that's why Archer exists, because we think that, look, why are we waiting until after the fraud case happens to catch it? With our API, we can see it immediately, and we can do it in a compliant way. And we can do it across all the institutions, not just in this one-to-one Slack channel where you're just two teams talking. We need to be able to do this across any financial institution in a given ecosystem.
So if you're a fintech or an institution out there that is interested in Archer, how can they get in touch?
They should reach out on LinkedIn. They'll be watching this on LinkedIn.
Well, a variety of places. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
They should find me on LinkedIn, Zach Bijesse, Bijesse, or email me, zach@archerprotect.com.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Zach. I could have talked to you for another hour. We'll have to have you back on for the Asimov episode.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thanks.